Hello, I'm Emily Hawthorne, a Middle East and North Africa analyst here at Stratfor. I'm here with my colleague Mark Fleming-Williams, an economy analyst. We're going to discuss the trade profile series that Mark and others have been working on. So Mark, what are trade profiles?
A trade profile is essentially what a country or bloc is thinking when it enters a trade negotiation. So whenever a country or bloc, and we've got 14 in the series, we're halfway through now. A country or bloc, when it enters a trade negotiation, there are things that it wants to talk about and there are things that it doesn't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. Now, the things that it wants to talk about is what are called offensive interests, mm-hmm. and those are usually things in which it's areas in which it's particularly competitive, because it would like to reduce the trade barriers with its conversation partner, with its negotiation partner, in order to be able to get more of its products or services into that other market.
Right.
On the other side, we've got defensive interests, and these are areas in which they're usually less competitive, and these are areas in which a bloc or country is worried that if they lower their trade barriers in that area, then they may get swamped by their trade partner. So in every negotiation, then every country or bloc has things that it wants to talk about and things that it's trying to change the subject away from.
Right. So what are some of the findings that you've discovered throughout building the 7 trade profiles so far in this 14-part series?
So one of the most interesting aspects that we've come across is the aspect of these factors of production. So every country or bloc has these endowments of land, labour and capital. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting to have a look at a country such as Japan, which has a very low endowment in land, but a high endowment in capital because it's been so successful for the last 7 decades particularly. And a historically large endowment in labour, which is beginning to shrink with its demographic crisis,
right.
And how that shapes the Japanese trade profile and its interests. In a way, it doesn't work every time. For example, with Mexico, it doesn't particularly have abundance in any of these things. With Mexico, actually, we instead of looking at offensive and defensive interests, we create a strategic interest. Mexico's advantage is about its access to the American market. It's geographical, which is very Stratfor to draw attention to.
Right.
But it's its geographical proximity. So this is Mexico's priority is to find ways when it's creating trade agreements is to find ways to maintain that and make the best use of that access to the US.
And so the next installment is the EU. So could you step us through some of the findings with the EU trade profile?
Absolutely. So the EU trade profile is coming out on Monday, and the EU is interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, because it is so big and so important. The EU and the US together shaped the post-war trade system. And so the EU's major focus and major presence in the global trade market is a lot about trying to set standards. It's in a competition to try and set global trade standards which everyone else will follow. It's a kind of soft power influencing game. So that's a strategic interest for the EU. The other interesting thing about the EU is that it's a reflection of all its member states. So you have, obviously you've got Germany, France, the UK, Italy. They've got strong histories. They've got a lot of money they've got a lot of money in each economy. And so their interests actually affect the overall. So, for example, the EU is very defensive in agriculture, largely historically because of France. France has been historically very protectionist in agriculture. It wants to protect its farmers and their way of life. So you've got the Common Agricultural Policy, which subsidizes European farmers, and which every negotiator trying to negotiate with the EU has been trying to reduce these subsidies and attack it. That's their offensive interest against the EU. And then from the other side, on the offensive side, then you've got obviously the German manufacturing machine, which is so successful at making cars, but also making machinery. And so that is a very strong EU-wide offensive interest as well. The interesting thing, obviously, coming up now is Brexit, which should be happening by 2019, after 2019. And in the UK's case, their offensive interest is in financial services. Right. So what we've seen up till now, because of the City of London, so what we've seen up to now has been the financial services has been an EU-wide trade priority. But obviously after 2019, we don't believe that the EU is going to be as competitive in financial services without London as part of the EU. And so as a result, we've moved financial services down from being a key offensive interest, down to being a subsidiary interest.
And there's still a great deal of uncertainty over how those negotiations are going to play out.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mark. For more on the EU trade profile coming out next week, as well as the 7 installments of the trade profile series so far, please visit worldview.stratfor.com.